Today we are talking about Unsharp masks and how to make them.
Welcome to the Naked Photographer, where I'll be exposing myself. No, I won't. That sounded better in my head.
An Unsharp mask is a tool used to create the illusion of a sharper print. So you would start with your negative, and from there you would make a blurry or unsharp print of that image on a piece of film. They are then placed one on top of the other, mask on top, in your negative carrier to make the print. And how this works is when it overlaps the image, that slightly blurry positive image will kind of block light in the major areas just a little bit, because it's not a very dark or contrasty image on that piece of film. But the blurry edges, being soft rather than hard, will allow more light to pass through than the darker patches of large areas. Therefore, you have a sharper line of contrast between dark and light areas, creating the illusion of sharpness. That actually brings me to probably the most important aspect of an unsharp mask. It does not actually sharpen your image. It will not make a blurry image focused. So keep that in mind. It's not going to take a photograph by Uda Barth and make it look like one from Ansel Adams. And if you don't understand that reference, you need to look at more photographs. All it's going to do is sharpen the contrast between two different areas in a very micro particular way, and that brings the illusion of sharpness. So, to make one, last time we looked at tools and materials that you'll need. So let's go ahead, go over to the enlarger and make a mask. I'll show you how everything is set up, and then the steps to go through and actually make that mask. So here is my original print. It's got quite a bit of sharp detail, being a wall and a flat surface, so my camera could focus on it pretty well. And I'm using a number 2 filter. So this is just a pretty much straight print. I didn't need to do any real dodging or burning. No contrast correction. It's pretty sharp, but we can go a little bit sharper. There are a couple of ways that you can set your enlarger up to do this. I want to show you 2 different ways. I use one of them. So the first way is to just have something like this little contact proofer. You don't have to use the contact proofer. You can just use like a piece of glass and a piece of craft foam. That really doesn't matter. This just makes it convenient because I can hinge it. If you don't have that option, just tape your glass to the table so that you can lift it up and lower it in the same spot every time. But with the proofer, what we are going to do, we're going to get some tape. This is just regular masking tape. Let's get a piece of scrap film. Just going to use this piece right here, and all I'm going to do is lay it, roughly in the middle, and I'm going to put a couple pieces of tape just so that I've got a marker of where to put the film in the dark. Alright, so we can push our film up against that. And I'll put it on the side here. There we go. Okay, so now I can locate where to put the film in the dark. Now I am using ortholith film, so I can actually have a red safe light on, but that doesn't mean it's easy to see a piece of dark film on a piece of dark foam in the safe light. So this is just to help me locate where I need to put it. Then I want to take the glass, I'm just going to close it down. I'm going to take my negative, so this is the original, and I'm going to locate it emulsion down, just like a print. And I'm going to put it on top of the piece of film, centered as best as possible. Doesn't have to be perfect. Now I'm going to take another couple of pieces of masking tape, and I'm just going to tape this down to the glass. And that's it. So now I can just put my piece of litho film down, close this, and I know that they are right on top of each other without any like overlap or anything like that. Of course I would click that down for tight contact. Now the light, what I'm going to do with that is we're going to lift the head as high as I can go. This is for a 4x5 negative, but a medium format or 35mm, you want it about 1 meter up above the baseboard. Now, the instructions that I'm giving you are based off of Catane's instructions in his book, Post-Exposure, so you can read that for a much better description if you like to read directions instead of watch them. But basically I want to get this up, and I'm creating kind of a shallow cone of light, because the way that we're going to get a blurry mask is by, one, creating a space between the mask and the original, so that piece of glass does that. But if the light were perfectly vertical, it would still be a pretty sharp mask, because the light falling through the negative would then just strike straight down to the mask. We need the light to spread outward a little bit. So to do that, we're raising this up and creating a cone of light. So the cone will create kind of an offset shadow onto the masking film. Of course, that's going to be affected by the angle of the cone and the amount of space between the original and the mask film. So I'm going to move this up fairly high. And get about 1 meter, 1.5 meters. I'm going to remove the negative, or I'm sorry, I'm going to remove the lens. I've got the 4x5 negative carrier put in there. And then to cut down the amount of light in order to get a reasonable exposure, because this particular film is about the same sensitivity as photo paper. So to get something to about the right speed, I'm going to go ahead and dial in quite a bit of neutral density. So to do that, I'm just going to dial my color head all the way up, as high as it'll go. And there we go. So that will lower the light level. And if I need to, I can put a couple of pieces of like white paper or something like that up where the negative carrier is, just to reduce the light even more to get an exposure kind of like a print. So work on that a little bit until you get everything right. Then you're just going to take a piece of masking film, like this ortho film. I get the ultrafine brand from Photo Warehouse, but you can also get the Arista brand from Freestyle or Ilford's ortho film. Their ortho film, though, I believe is quite a bit faster than the other two litho films, so you might have to reduce the light even more for that. So you're going to get a sheet out of the box, put it in there. You want it emulsion down, then close it up and do your regular test strip, and then develop that and see how it works out. The other method that you can use to expose the mask, and this is the way that I'm going to do it, is to not use this at all. So I'm just going to remove my negative. I'm going to put this aside. And what I use, I'm going to put it, oh, there we go, is a piece of foam. And this is just the thin, like 1.5 millimeter thick craft foam. And I will place it on my enlarger. I will manipulate my enlarger to about the same height as an 8x10 print. So let me turn this on and get that. There we go. And then I'll center this. My negative is going to be in the middle, so I'm going to kind of center it up and just tape it down. Because it's lightweight, it likes to slide, so I'll just tape it so it doesn't do that. Okay, from there I just have a piece of glass. This is not very thick, it's only about a 1/16 of an inch thick piece of glass, and I tape it to make it a hinge. And it's the same thing. You can use tape as before to just kind of give you a locator to push this up against and tape your negative on there. But I am actually not going to do that. I am actually going to use a pin register system. But let me show you quick what I do. So if you're not using the pin register, that's okay. So you're going to have your negative in there, or your mask film. So you'll place this with the lights off. Then, if I can find it. Oh, here it is. I have a piece of masking film, the ortholith film, that I fixed and washed and dried right out of the box. So it's perfectly clear, there's no texture. I will lay it down right on top, and then my negative, the masking film is emulsion down, so I'm exposing through the base of the mask film. I've got the piece of clear as a spacer, so it's a very thin spacer, and then I have my original negative emulsion down as well. So we'll dust each of these off. So I would dust this off, put it down, dust this off, put it down, close the glass. I have my lens in place, so it is creating a cone of light just as before, but it's a more focused cone of light, so I've got it a little bit closer. So the spread is only about the same as an 8x10 print. The thin spacer will lift the negative up a little bit, but then to create even more unsharpness, I use this. This is the white acrylic from the pre-flash video that we saw. And I will use this and cover, and then I'll expose through that. So this absorbs quite a bit of light. I can close my aperture down as needed, just like printing. And so here, by using the diffusion above the negative, it acts differently than the first method. The first method is using a sharp, small point of light way up high to create a cone to create spread. Here, the light hits the diffusion and now it breaks up. So instead of moving in a straight line of a cone, it's scattered in all direction and it creates a blurriness. And of course I can adjust the amount of blurriness by adjusting the thickness of the spacer between the negative and the mask. I am using a piece of ortholith film that's been cleared. That's it. If I wanted a little bit more space, I could use a piece of camera film that's been fixed and washed so that it's clear, because that's a little bit thicker, about twice as thick. So that would double my space. I could take the negative on top of the glass itself and have a 1/16 of an inch thick space. And I actually made a mask of that, so I'll show you the results from that as well. So this method will work just as well as the previous. You'll get the exact same results if you dial in your variables. Either way doesn't really matter. I find this way a little bit easier because that's the way I learned. If you get the kit from Lynn Radeka's site, and I apologize if I mispronounced your name if you happen to watch this video. So it's a method similar to this, where I'm using diffusion instead. And I believe he provides diffusion in his kit if you get it. The instructions are a little bit more thorough if you want to read that, so that's a good kit to get as well. So now that I've got the diffusion, all I'm going to do there is the same setup, just my steps of a test strip. So let me turn the lights out, put some film in there, and we'll make the test strip and take a look at it on the light box and see what it looks like. Step one, let's get some film out of the box. This film is not punched with an edge code, so it can be a little difficult to figure out which is the emulsion and which is the base. I would recommend you get a piece of film out, don't flip it over, be very careful not to. Dip your finger in your developer, rub it on one side. If it turns dark, that's the emulsion side. If it doesn't, flip it over and do the same. Then you know which side is always emulsion up in the box. Write it on the box and you'll know. So my particular box is emulsion down, so I leave my film emulsion down. So I'm going to put this in my punch it. So I've got little holes just along the top edge of the negative. I'm sorry, the mask film, not the negative. Though I do have it on the negative too. Alright, now I'm going to locate my pens. I'm going to put my spacer next. So this is emulsion down for the mask film. I'm going to be exposing through the base, which is different than what you would do normally for your shot. And now I'm going to put the negative emulsion down. There we go. Okay, close my glass over it and put my diffusion over. So now I'm going to turn on the enlarger. It's going to get a little loud. I've got my aperture set to what I want for the mask. I've already done this a few times, so I know where I want to set it. You will have to probably trial and error and figure it out for yourself. So I'm going to use 5-second increments. It can be a little hard at first to figure out where your negative sandwich is. Because I've done this a few times, I know where I put it. I kind of line the top edge of my diffusion with the top edge of my black here. If you need help, just make little pencil lines so you can know where to use it. And I'll just test it, just like normal. So this is Kodak Dectol mixed 1 part developer to 40 parts water. So it's 400 milliliters of water, 10 milliliters of Dectol. And I'm going to develop it for simply 1 minute, no longer than that. So here is the test strip. And this is one of the irritating things with making a mask. It takes a long time to make one because we have to completely fix, wash, and dry our mask each and every time in order to use it. So here I can see I've got a bit of blurriness in my fine detail, because if I look at my original negative, it is very sharp right here, but here it is clearly slightly blurry, and that's what I want. I don't want it very sharp. But as you can see from the density of the original negative, this is very, very light. Again, that's what I want to see. I don't want to see very dense. I don't want to see a lot of contrast. This is a pale brown because of that 1 minute developing time. Here is a 2 minute developing time. And you can see it's got significant more density, but it also has less of that brown. That brown is just from a very short development time in a very weak developer, it oxidizes very quickly and creates that stain. It does not affect your image unless you're making a color print from a color negative, in which case you're not using this film anyway. You should be using black and white camera film. Now, what I'm looking for is a good print time in here. This is 25, this is 20, and on down. And you are looking for a section that you start to pick up the density in the lighter tones. If you don't expose dark enough, like up here, these lighter gray tones are completely blank in the mask, which means there will be zero sharpening effect in your final print. And that's no good. We're not making this to have sharp increase in just part of the print. We want it in the whole thing. So this section, no good for us. We're going to look deeper and deeper down in there. This is actually a little too much. It's just blocking too much light. So I'm going to pick the 20 and we'll go from there. So let's now make an exposure exactly the same way, but with the new time. As we saw in that test strip, to get the detail up into the upper midtones, I'm going to need to give it a 20-second long exposure. I actually feel like 21 seconds might be better for what I'm doing. So I've got everything still set up just for that. So let's grab another piece of film and we'll make that 21-second long exposure. Let's punch that. Don't know why I keep moving that. I'm going to use it, so let's just keep it up here. Okay, so we'll put this down, emulsion down just as before. Let's wipe this, any dust off of there, dust off of here, and then we'll put the spacer down. Wipe that off. Wipe dust off our original and put that in, emulsion down. Okay, close it up. Diffusion, I'm going to set this to 21 seconds and we'll make our exposure. Alright, and here is my final mask. I realize with the backlight shining towards the video camera it might be hard to see, but I do have a very small hint of detail in these highlight areas, which is what I want. I do not have very dark shadows. That's the low contrast. Compare that to this one. It's exposed exactly the same, but developed longer. So I have a much more contrasty mask here. And all that's going to do is reduce the contrast in my final print far too much. So I'm going to use this one and we will go from there. So I recommend just a 1 minute developing time for an Unsharp mask. That was at a dilution of 40 parts water to 1 part Dektol. So to align this, it's pretty easy. I'm going to show you over there, or I showed you earlier with the registration. So this is how we would do it without. So I'm just going to take my negative. Let me get some tape. And I'm just going to use some masking tape. Normally I would not, but I can't find my other tape today. All I'm going to do is put a little bit under this corner. I'm going to put a little bit under this corner. Oops. And now I'm going to take my mask. It's oriented the same way. So this is emulsion down, and this is emulsion down. And you just line them up. Just line up the details as best as you can. Because it's slightly blurry, if you're slightly off, it's no big deal. I mean, you can tell when it's not together. So just take your time, be patient with it, look for hard edges. In this case, I actually have the edge of the negative to go by. I also have the holes, but let's assume you don't have holes in yours. I can get the film edge lined up. There we go. And I'm going to fold my tape down there. I'm going to fold it up right here. And now we're taped. So let's put this in the negative carrier. And you can see, even just with that reduced our contrast, because the positive portion of that mask lays over the negative portion of the negative and kind of flattens it out. So let's go take a look. So I've got my mask, I've got my original negative, and I have them taped together. So all I'm going to do is just put them into my negative carrier as normal. So emulsion down on the negative. I'm not going to do anything different from here as a normal print. So close that up. Put this up top. Grab my easel. And now I'm going to go ahead and just focus my image. Now I'm just going to make a print. I don't know. Let me turn this off to talk for a moment. So I don't know yet what my exposure time or contrast is going to be to compensate for the negative on top of, or the mask on top of the negative. It is going to change. I've got something now blocking more light. So I'm going to do a test strip just as before. I printed my original with a 2 filter. I'm just going to guess as a starting point at a 3 filter. Because the shadows of the print are going to be blocked a little bit more than the highlights by the mask, because the mask has contrast of its own and it's a positive image. Therefore, it's kind of neutralizing the tones of the negative. My print contrast is going to have to go up in order to match my original print. So just be aware of that. How much? That depends on the density and contrast of your mask. The more contrast in your mask, the more contrast you're going to have to compensate with. The more density in your mask, the longer you're going to have to print to make up for that mask. So those are 2 variables. The third variable of a mask is how unsharp it is. So I'm going to make a series of masks that are sharper or more blurry than this once I get this print made, and we'll see what the effects are of getting a different amount of unsharpness. Okay, so first off, let's stop this down to 11. Put my 3 filter in place. And I'm going to get some paper and make a test strip. So let's go back to the table and we'll look at this print compared to my original to see what the sharpness effect of this mask looks like. So here's my original, and then here's the print with the mask. The contrast is almost identical. So this is with a 3 filter for the masked print, a 2 filter with the unmasked. 3.5 was too strong. I could probably get away with it, but it kind of made the blacks a little too dark. Really something in between would have been better. But they don't make a 3 3/4, so Ilford, get on that. So let's take a closer look at these, because the difference is kind of in the micro contrast. You're not going to see it just held up like this. You're really going to have to peer close. So I've got a macro lens set up over here. So let's take a closer look at the differences between them. Here's a close-up. This is the original, and everything looks pretty good. I'm looking at this particular area because I've got some sharp detail here, I've got some detail here, and this is where we're really kind of looking for that sharpening effect. So everything looks really good there. So let's compare that to a print with the mask. So side by side, we can see it does have kind of a sharpening right in here, particularly this vertical line, these little rivets. That area is really showing an increase in sharpness. And really what I've got is kind of an increase in the contrast between these areas. That's what the mask is creating. It's not actually making the grain or the image sharper, but it is making that contrast more evident, and therefore a sharper apparent print. So this is a good mask. This is what I want. It's going to be kind of a subtle look. It's not going to be a tremendous amount. I did have to print with a 3 filter versus the 2 filter of the other because of the contrast reduction power. I tried a 3.5 and it was too much. All right, now to give you kind of a sense of difference, here's the final mask that I went with. That was my original 21-second time, 1 minute developing. I already showed you the 2-minute developing time here, same exposure. I did not make a print from this. And that's because all it did was lower the contrast of the print, but the sharpening was the same. What I want to show you though is what happens when you have different sharpness. So this is the same exposure time, the same developing time, but sharp edges. I did not create an unsharp mask. This is a sharp mask. So let's take a quick look at what that print would look like. So let's put this on top of my negative and we'll make a print. Here's a print from the sharp mask. And at first it looks okay. There doesn't seem to be any kind of apparent problem, but it gives me, from that sharpness, kind of a bas relief effect, particularly up in this area and down in the corner. Let me show you a big difference. This corner area of the print versus this corner area of the print. And it may be hard to see here. I apologize. I'm trying to get this as best as I can. But yes, this seems a little sharper than here, but I'm also getting this weird bas relief. And you don't want that. That's a sharp mask. It gets kind of grotesque. So don't recommend a sharp mask. I can also see it a little bit here in the door, particularly in these areas. It's unpleasant. So sharp mask, not the best option. Now let's look at what happens the other way if we make it even softer. So again, this is the same exposure time, the same development time, but this time what I did was, instead of using the piece of clear film as a spacer when making the mask, I actually put that 1/16 inch or 1.5 millimeter thick glass between my negative and the paper. So that created a much wider gap, but I still used the same diffusion, I still used the same exposure and everything. And you can see that that is far blurrier. The detail is a lot more distorted. So let's put these together and make a print from this one. Here is our print with the soft mask. So this is the 1/16 of an inch thick glass between to make the mask. It still has a mild sharpening effect, that's great, but that extra soft fuzzy edge has created these kind of halos that occur between the areas of dark density and light density. So while it is giving me a sharpness increase, it's also creating these weird halos around dark and light areas. I can really see it here around this window pretty strong. And finally, let's look at an even blurrier mask. So this is, again, same exposure time, same development time, same amount of diffusion, but the gap is now a 1/4 inch or 6 millimeters. So in this mask, what I used was the contact proofer that I showed at the beginning of the video, and I put the negative on top of that glass, which is much thicker, 4 times thicker than before. Now, I told you before that if you don't use diffusion, the way Catane has in his book is putting the film on top of that 1/4 inch thick glass. But because he is not using diffusion, he's using that cone of light, of sharp light, to create diffusion, or rather blurriness about equal to this. Here, however, I'm using the same distance he would use, but I am using the diffusion method that I did for this mask. And so it's created really, really soft mask. I mean, like, so soft it's ridiculous. But for the sake of thoroughness, let's put these together and let's make a print from this. That halo effect is even worse, and there's no sharpening here. So now I'm just creating halos and I'm not even getting sharpening. This particular mask is from that 1/4 inch thick glass. Not the best effect, and not what I'm looking for with an Unsharp mask. And that is mask making in a nutshell. It just takes a little bit of trial and error to figure out the right exposure time, development time, and then correcting for the loss of contrast. The amount of blurriness is up to you. You really just need to make a print and see if it does what you want it to do. If it does, great. If not, then tweak the mask a little bit. Just change the spacing, get the right blurriness. Either technique works. Diffuse, like what I did, or just higher sharp light and a thicker piece of glass. Trial and error. I'm afraid that's all there is. There is no set way in stone. Once you have your mask, just file it away with your negative, keep them together, and use it when you're ready. So it doesn't take a whole lot of equipment. It just takes a little bit of patience and a little bit of trial and error, and you can do it. The effects, they're subtle. They're not meant to be a major change. It's just meant to enhance the image that you're making. So once you're ready and you've got that mask, make the best print that you can. Get out there and make more photographs. So thank you for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe. Please share this channel with other photography friends of yours so that we can get up to the 2,000 subscriber mark. And if you want to help support this channel, you can always go to my Teespring store down in the description, or my print store down in the description, and help support this channel. Thank you for watching.